So now that we've talked about our three betting fundamentals, we're going to turn our attention to three betting for value. And we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive look at three betting for value. So we're going to talk about this first, and then after this, we'll talk about three betting as a bluff because this is going to be the most important of the two. So I want to make sure we talk about this first. In regards to three betting for value, there are multiple different things that we can look at and consider. But at the micro stakes, there's really one primary consideration that I want you to focus on, and that's our opponent's open raising range. Now, in addition to this, we can look at other things such as their three bet calling range, their fold frequency, their four betting range, and their four betting frequency. But I don't want to confuse you with too much information. So we're just going to stick with our primary consideration of our opponent's open raising range. Now, let's take a look at that. And why is that important? Well, just like in any other situation, we want to know what our opponent is doing. And specifically, we want to know what type of a range that they're doing it with. So when somebody open raises and we have a hand that we might consider three betting for value, that may not be a clear-cut hand. Maybe it's pocket jacks or pocket queens. Well, we want to make sure that our three bet value range is stronger than our opponent's open raising range. So with pocket aces and pocket kings, that's going to be a clear three bet for value. But what if we have a hand, like I said, that's pocket queens or pocket jacks? It's not always a clear three bet. So we always want to make sure that our three bet value range is stronger than our opponent's open raising range. And in the next slide, we'll take a look at some default ranges that you can use. So in general, the stronger our opponent's open raising range, the stronger our three bet value range needs to be. Pretty straightforward, right? If we have a tag that's open raising under the gun versus a lag that is open raising on the button, well, the tag that's open raising under the gun is definitely going to have a stronger range than the lag that's open raising in late position on the button. So for example, we wouldn't three bet pocket tens versus an open raising range of pocket jacks plus, but we would versus a range of pocket sixes plus. Pretty straightforward, right? Because if we do this, if we three bet pocket tens versus a range of jacks, queens, kings, and aces, then we're turning our hand into a bluff because we don't beat anything within this range. And if we put this into Equilab, pocket tens versus jacks, queens, kings, and aces, you would see that. Now on the flip side, if we put our opponent on a raising range of pocket sixes plus, then pocket tens then becomes a value three bet because we beat sixes, eights, and nines within their open raising range. Now we don't beat everything within their range, but we do beat some of the hands within their range. So we're going to be ahead of a decent portion of their range. Now let's take a look at our default ranges and let's talk about this. And I'll actually pull up Equilab as well as we go through this. So let me get Equilab ready. So before we actually look at Equilab, let's just take a look at what's in here. And I want to give you an idea of why we want to take a look at Equilab as well. So what I did here is I put together a table of some default ranges that you can use to three bet for value at the micro stakes. And what I did is I have these versus different raises. So what we see is versus under the gun 9.8% open raise range, a middle position 12.67% open raise range, and so forth. And these should look familiar because these are the default ranges that I provided you in this course. So what I did is I put these ranges into Equilab and I determined a three bet value range that's going to have good equity versus that range. And what you notice here is that I determined these ranges based upon the amount of equity. And we want them to have a decent amount of equity. And you'll notice everything in here is at least in the low 60th percentile up to even the high 60th percentile. So we're always going to have a lot of equity versus our opponent's open raising range. And that's what we want to do when we are three betting for value. Now, we can use this table in a couple of ways. If we're playing against a tag and we're assuming that they are playing ranges similar to what we're playing, then we can use it that way. So versus an under the gun opponent, we can look at the default ranges we should 3-bet because we're estimating they're using a range similar to ours. Then we can do it that way. If they're in middle position, then maybe they'll have close to what we're doing. So again, we look at the default ranges, and if we think they're opening a little wider, we can include the optional ranges as well. Now on the flip side, what we can do, let's say that we have a positionally unaware opponent that is opening the same frequency or the same range of hands in every single position. Let's say that their PFR is 22% all the way around for every position, then this would be our 3-betting range against them regardless of the position. So we would simply look at this. Now let's take a look at Ecolab because I want you to understand how I put this together. And in regards to the default versus optional, the default is of course going to be a default range that you should 3-bet against this type of an open raising range. And the optional is if we think that they are open raising a little bit of a wider range. And so we can 3-bet a little bit of a wider range. And what you're going to notice is that for the small blind in the cutoff, it's the same percentage of a range against, but in the small blind, if we face an open raise from the small blind in sublind versus blind situation, let me highlight this, and we're in the big blind, then compared to when the cutoff open raises and we want to 3-bet them, you're going to notice that this is wider. Because in this situation, it's unique because when small blind open raises, when it folds around the small blind, then it goes to us in the big blind. And if we 3-bet, we get to play in position to the small blind. In these situations, we may be out of position. So if cutoff open raises or button open raises, and we're in the small blind or we're in the big blind, then we're going to be forced to play out of position. In this situation, we're going to be in position, so we can we can 3-bet a wider range versus that open raise. You'll also notice that for the cutoff and the button, it's the same ranges. So why is that? Even though button is raising a wider range. Well, we don't want to, in all instances, we don't want to take hands that could be good calling hands and turning them into a 3-bet where we're not entirely sure if it's going to be a value 3-bet or potentially a bluff. So when we get down to hands such as, let's say, if we went further, pocket tens, or some of these optional hands such as king, queen suited, or ace 10 suited, these are hands that we can call and not bloat the pot, and they'll do well against our opponent's range. But if we start 3-betting these all the time, and that's why I have these as optional, we could put pocket tens in here as well, is that we're blurring the lines between whether this is a value 3-bet or this is a 3-bet as a bluff. And I think in most instances, jacks, queens, kings, and aces, ace, queen plus, and ace, jack suited is going to be hands that are typically going to be a value hand when we're 3-betting it versus this wide of a range. Okay, so let's bring in Ecolab and let me show you how you can do something similar to this. So let's say, and my range chart opened up on the other screen. So let's say for MP2, that's going to be under the gun. So let's pull up our ranges, or open raising ranges, and we'll put in under the gun pre-flop raising range of 9.8%. We'll put that into there, and what we can do, let's say that we're next to act and we want a 3-bet. So we can either type in a hand or we can use this range selection. So we'll click here, and let's say we have aces and kings only. We can click evaluate, and what it's going to show here, and let me get my arrow tool, is that our equity is here on the bottom, and our opponent's equity that's open raising, this 9.8%, they have a 21.44% chance of winning the hand. Kings and aces has a 78.56% chance of winning the hand. And what this is the equity when the hand goes to showdown to the river. So what you'll notice here is that we have aces, kings, ace king suited by default, and then optionally we can add an ace king off and pocket queens. So what we can do is we'll just put all those into there, click OK, evaluate again, and there you go. With our optional range in there as well, our equity is 65.68%. We could continue to add in additional hands, and let's just add in some more hands. And what you'll notice is as we add in more hands, our equity declines. Now we still have range advantage in regards to our equity versus their open raising range, but our equity declines. And what we could do is we could actually clear this out, and we could also pick specific hands. So for example, pocket jacks. We could take a look at that. We could even go further. Let's say we could go down to pocket sixes and we could look at it. So this is an easy way for you just to start playing around and understanding. And you can actually take these ranges I provide and tweak them a bit and potentially devise your own default 3-betting ranges. Now what we can also do, if we wanted to, and let's clear this out, let's clear all this out, we can go back into here, and let me bring this over to the other screen. If we wanted to, we could put these ranges within Equilab, just like we did for our open raising ranges. So I'm not going to do a separate video on that, but what you could do is you could do a subfolder, and we could say, you could do something like this versus an under the gun raise first in, or we could say PFR, pre-flop raise, whatever you want to say, and I'm just saying versus. We could do something like that and create a subfolder for each one, or we could just simply delete that and we could put them all within here, and let's put everything in here. So here's the default, and we have our optional as well, and we can save this as and you could do that for every single one. And then as you're playing, you can have this expanded. You can go through here. When you're facing a bet, you could look at this, okay, and say, okay, well, here's my ranges that I can use. If you only want to put the default ones in, then you can take the other ones out and save it. And it looks like it saved it as a new one, so we'll delete the old one. And there you would have the default ranges. So based upon what you do, in regards to this equity analysis, I included the default plus the optional. And in regards to the optional, unfortunately, with the free version of this, we can't color select different colors for them. So they're all going to show up in blue regardless. But the thing is that even with the optional range, you're going to be at an equity advantage versus these open raising ranges. The only thing is that these ones on the optional, they don't have as much of an equity edge versus the default ranges. So if you're new to the game, or if you're struggling and you haven't had a lot of experience 3-betting, just stick to the default ranges at first. And then as you start to improve, then you can start adding in some of the optional ranges. But this equity is calculated including these optional ranges versus these open raising ranges that I provided you earlier in the course. So that's going to conclude our discussion on 3-betting for value. In the next video, we're going to talk about 3-betting as a bluff. So if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.